Hello, I'm Tom Wilkinson, and welcome to the Thinking in English podcast, a podcast aimed at intermediate to advanced level English learners. Where is the best place to live in the entire world? Which city has the best living conditions? And how can we determine what the best really means? Well, fortunately for us, the Global Liveability Index 2021 was recently released, which answers many of these questions, and I will discuss the results on this episode of Thinking in English. But first, why not follow the Thinking in English Instagram page, Thinking in English podcast, or the link is in the description. And you definitely should look at our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog, for all transcripts and bonus content. Here is today's vocabulary list. As always, the written list is available in the description of the podcast and also on our blog, thinkinginenglish.blog. Quality. Quality. A quality is a characteristic or feature of someone or something. As in, I don't think he has the right qualities to be a teacher. Infrastructure. Infrastructure. Infrastructure is the basic systems and services, such as transport or power supplies, that a country or organization uses in order to work effectively. For example, the war has badly damaged the country's infrastructure. To cope. To cope. This means to deal successfully with a difficult situation. For instance, it must be really hard to cope with 3 young children and a job. Generous. Generous. If something is generous, it is more or larger than usual or expected. As in, my boss gave me a generous pay increase. Domestically. Domestically. Inside a particular country rather than in other countries. For instance, the movie made $76 million domestically, but only $1.3 million abroad. To plummet. To plummet. To plummet means to fall very quickly and suddenly. For instance, house prices have plummeted in recent months. Civil. Civil. If something is civil, it is not military and not religious, and it relates to the ordinary people of a country. For example, helicopters are mainly used for military rather than civil use. And finally today, to favor. To favor. To favor means to support or prefer one particular possibility. For example, I generally favor traveling by night when the roads are quiet. Over the last few months, I have recorded podcasts looking at the most expensive cities to live in the world and the most dangerous places in the world. Being expensive and being dangerous are not particularly good qualities for the place you want to call home. But what are excellent qualities for cities to have? What makes a place good to live in? Is it safety, health, culture, prices, transport, environment, something different? And how are we, as normal people, supposed to research all of these different aspects across all of the different cities in the world? How can a normal person really know where the best place to live is? Well, fortunately for us, someone else has done all of the hard work already. The Global Liveability Index 2021, which is produced by the Economist Intelligence Unit, surveys and ranks livability in 140 cities around the globe. The report defines the concept of livability as the locations around the world that provide the best and worst living conditions. So, in simple terms, how easy and enjoyable it is or is not to live somewhere. And it does this by giving ratings to over 30 qualitative and quantitative factors across 5 large categories: stability, healthcare, culture and environment, education, and infrastructure. This year, the report also incorporated new factors related to COVID-19. For example, how a city coped with increased need for healthcare, or with closures of different businesses. Less strict rules increased the country's score or the city's score. Yet, if this freedom caused more cases of virus, their score will reduce. So, in a nutshell, the best performing cities combine generous freedoms with few cases of COVID-19. I'll leave a link to the report on the blog and maybe in the description of the podcast, but it is a little complicated to access. So I will introduce and explain some of the major findings of this year's index in this episode. Let's start with the big question. Where is the best place to live in 2021? According to the report, the answer is Auckland in New Zealand, which averaged 96 out of 100 across the 5 categories. This is largely due to Auckland's and New Zealand's success in containing and preventing the pandemic, and in lifting restrictions across the city. Earlier this year, while most cities around the world were struggling to deal with massive problems caused by COVID, Auckland was holding music concerts outside and experiencing many days with 0 new cases of the virus. Students have been able to attend school throughout the pandemic, while restaurants, museums, theatres, cafes, and other venues have remained open. In fact, Auckland has moved up from 12th position in 2019 to the 1st position this year. 8 of the top 10 best cities to live in are actually located on island countries with strict and relatively successful responses to the pandemic. In addition to Auckland, New Zealand's Wellington was given 4th place. Japan's Osaka is in 2nd place, while Tokyo is ranked 5th, due to very high stability scores in the Asian country. And 4 Australian cities are also in the top 10. All of these countries managed to keep freedom of movement domestically and stopped international travel almost completely over the last year. The other 2 cities in the top 10 are Switzerland's Zurich and Geneva. I'm sure most of you have guessed or assumed by now that the pandemic has been the biggest factor in changing the livability of cities around the world. Cities with long-running and strict lockdowns have been deeply affected. To be honest, in the vast majority of cities, living conditions have plummeted compared with 2 years ago. Major European cities are now less livable. This is because they have had high numbers of COVID cases and strict lockdowns, which is the worst possible combination for livability rankings. The scores of Prague, London, and Frankfurt fell by over 13 points compared to last time. Vienna in Austria which was the number one ranked city in the entire world 2 years ago, came only 12th this year. The places which fell the furthest down the rankings were the German cities of Frankfurt, Hamburg, and Dusseldorf. Canadian cities such as Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, and Toronto, which were traditionally highly ranked, have also struggled this year. European and Canadian cities found it difficult to cope with the additional stress on healthcare systems and resources, and this made their rankings fall. On the other hand, some American cities like Honolulu in Hawaii and Houston in Texas, which lifted social restrictions earlier than most of the world, have risen in the rankings. How about at the other end of the index? Where are the least livable places? Where are the worst places to live in the world this year? As has been the case for a number of years, Damascus in Syria has the worst living conditions. Other cities at the bottom of the table include Lagos in Nigeria, Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea, and Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh. All of the cities in the bottom 10 performed poorly across the 5 categories the report assessed. And most of these cities have experienced civil and military unrest, which has made their stability scores very low. In addition, the impact of COVID-19 has made these scores even lower. Across the world, healthcare scores were badly affected by the ongoing pandemic. In fact, the average city ranking dropped by nearly 5 points compared to 6 months ago. In particular, Prague in the Czech Republic, Athens in Greece, and Jakarta in Indonesia have experienced significant drops in healthcare ranking. Moreover, the average scores around the world in culture and environment categories fell by 14 points out of 100. In general, cities in New Zealand, Australia, China, Switzerland, and some of the US have improved as they did not need or use large-scale lockdowns. Most of Europe, on the other hand, fell in the rankings due to their high COVID cases and strict lockdowns. So here is today's final thought. In this episode of Thinking in English, I have tried to look at the Global Liveability Index 2021 and explain some of its findings. The best places to live this year are also the places which have dealt best with the pandemic and have had the least restrictions. If you want to move to the most livable city in the world, you should be looking to relocate to Auckland in New Zealand. How about the future? What will happen next year or the year after? Well, COVID-19 will almost certainly continue to affect cities' livability. Cities in regions with slower vaccination programs will likely experience more and longer lockdowns. In regions with faster inoculations, culture, environment, and health scores should improve. Interestingly, what people think is important in a city is also changing. People are beginning to favor green spaces and parks more, while transport, which is being used less due to lockdowns, is seen as less important. Where do you think the best city to live in is? How about your city? How would you rate your hometown? What do you think makes a city livable? Thank you for listening to today's episode of Thinking in English. Please share with your friends, check out our social media links in the description, and send us a message. We really appreciate all of your feedback. And if you have any ideas for topics or future podcast guests or any other learning format, please let us know. And please leave me a rating. We're now on Instagram. I'm sure you've already seen it, but go there, check it out. Lots of good content about vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. And Instagram is a great way to contact me. It's Thinking in English Podcast on Instagram, or the link is in the description. Also, all of the transcripts of the podcast are now available on the Thinking in English blog. Vocabulary list, comprehension questions, and all of the articles are there for you to read. That link is also in the description, so please check it out too. Thank you, and see you next time.